All right. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the next of our ongoing series of Webinar Wednesdays. This one we wanted to talk about the 911 call handling best practice. As you may recall, in December, I believe it was, we did a webinar on the 911 addressing best practice. We're going to run through some of the background that we did on that one as well, because I do think this is probably a different audience. And then we do have some audience participation. We would like your feedback, but moving forward with this. But again, just a housekeeping thing, if you can mute your line so that we don't hear a lot of background noise. And then, when you want to ask a question, feel free to do so. Just unmute we can respond to your question then. So just real quick, what we plan to do is talk about the background of the best practices effort. As I mentioned, review the 911 call handling best practices and then talk about what we're going to do in the future, the next steps. You may recall last year the board commissioned two reports. One was the comprehensive plan and one was the feasibility study. The comprehensive plan had a total of 7 goals, and embedded within those were a call for best practices. Specifically, there were 3 goals that really kind of incorporated the concept of best practices and the need for best practices, and that was goal 1, 2, and 7. And I'm not going to read each of the goals to you, but it is important to recognize that this isn't a standalone effort. It does integrate into the bigger effort of the comprehensive plan for 911 for the Commonwealth. And similarly with the NG911 feasibility study that the board commissioned, there were some specific recommendations that Mission Critical Partners made as it related to best practices and standards throughout the document. And you may remember there was 141 total recommendations that were made, and we broke those down into themes, and one of those themes was best practices and standards. And specifically, you can see the 3 recommendations that Mission Critical Partner made that we talked about incorporating into our work plan for this past year, from when the board approved it or accepted it in March of 2015 and through July 1st of this year was the time period we said we were going to undertake these 3 recommendations from MCP and address them one way or another. And what we had originally said, or what we said we wanted to do, was form work groups or a work group that would really kind of guide this effort going forward. And based on feedback from the PSAP community and the localities in general, they asked us to wait until the Regional Advisory Council, or RAC, was created before we did that. And the RAC was formed in December, has had their organizational meetings, has actually started working heavily on the comprehensive plan, getting agreement on what the goals and initiatives mean, and then assigning tasks and actions to those initiatives of what it is we as a Commonwealth want to accomplish. And one of those things is best practices and standards, or several of those things are actually best practices and standards. So the Regional Advisory Council is either going to form a group, a subgroup that may include RAC members, or they may, as themselves, stay the steering committee for the best practices process. But at the end of the day, we're going to need subject matter experts moving forward. So some of the work groups may be task-specific best practices. So we'll be looking for expertise in whatever that best practice is, in order to draft it. So ultimately, there's going to need to be a list of all of the standards and best practices that we want to create for next generation 911. As an example, cybersecurity would be one that would probably be on the list, or there might be one on there for routing wireless 911 calls or something. Then we're going to need to prioritize that list. I suspect that initial list will be rather lengthy, and we're going to have to decide what comes first. What do we need to work on first, and then begin developing those best practices again with work groups that we might have that have the expertise and the subject matter expertise that we're looking for. So in the meantime, we didn't want to just sit and wait. We didn't want to just sit back and say, okay, well, we'll wait for this committee to be formed and the RAC to be formed. We wanted to start working on something within the Integrated Services Program at VITA. So you may remember Buster Brown, who was a regional coordinator in Roanoke. He worked to develop a list of potential best practices, and from that we chose 2 to start with. And you can consider them samples or proof of concepts or something for that we wanted to be able to come into the discussion with, so that we would have a starting point, and so that people could see what we mean when we're talking about best practices. Because best practices and standards, those terms are used quite frequently and in different ways. So we wanted to make sure people understood that we're talking about a best practice. It's not a requirement, it's not a mandate, but it's rather something that is designed to help the localities. And the 2 we chose to do were the 911 addressing and call handling. And somebody, if you can mute your phone, I'm kind of a lot of background noise of somebody shuffling papers. So if you're shuffling papers, please mute your phone. I would appreciate that.
I got it.
So the 911 addressing and the call handling were the first 2 that we started for development. So we went out and talked with several localities that we felt did those things well. We also looked at what the associations had. NINA and APCO have best practices out there.
7024.
Whoever just said 7024, mute your phone, please. Thank you. So So we did look at what exists out there already in these 2 areas. We didn't start from scratch. And we completed the 2 drafts. Again, the one in December we presented was the 911 addressing, and this one is the 911 call handling. We will be presenting them to the Regional Advisory Council. We've talked to the Regional Advisory Council about the overall process. But probably one of the most important things to take from this call is that these are evolving documents. They're not one-time developed and you forget them. We want them to be continually growing and improving. As you use them, if you found something in them that really wasn't the best practice, we need to know about that. If there's something that you found is a better practice and worked better than what's in these documents, then you should let us know. I was at a meeting the other day with a locality, and they said that they didn't think that in our 911 addressing best practice that they disagreed with putting in the ordinance the addressing process and the addressing structure or methodology. They said that was better at a department level policy, so it could be more easily changed. And I don't disagree with that, but not every locality has a department that can do addressing, like planning or GIS. So, it really ultimately, we need that feedback so that we can evolve these documents and make them better as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to shut up and turn it over to Stephanie to talk about the best practice itself. Are there any questions about the background of how we got to where we are? And again, the document is on our website. If you haven't seen it, it's under the webinar series link for today's webinar. There's a link there to the PDF that is the current draft as it stands. With that, Stephanie, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. So now I'm going to spend some time discussing the 911 call handling best practice. I want to review the focus of the document and the main topics that it contains, and then talk about the best practices that are in the document related to those topics. So like Steve said, remember that the document is still in draft form, so I'd like to get some feedback from you regarding the content of the document. So if you have thoughts on what I'm going over, please feel free to speak up about those. And again, we want to make sure that this document is helpful to you and to your PSAP operations, so we need your feedback to do that. And also, like Steve said, the draft document is available on our website on the webinar page, so I encourage everyone to read it. And when you do, you'll find that some of the information is likely considered common practice, while other parts will hopefully have things that you think that you should include in your PSAP's operations. So the document won't necessarily be everything to everyone, but it is valuable, and it is a good place to begin putting down in writing the things that we should be, considered best practices for all PSAPs in the Commonwealth. So Steve, next slide. All right, so first let's go over what a best practice is so that we all have the same concept in mind. So in general, a best practice is considered a method of doing something that, when followed, shows superior results. So best practices should be used as benchmarks, and then when followed, allows for consistency in process, data, systems, and et cetera, so that those things can be more easily integrated. And Steve, I'm sorry, I have to ask you to click again. You'll have to do that a couple times. Sorry. So a best practice is a guide in part or in total for validating or improving the 911 call handling process at your PSAP. So best practices are not absolute, and they are not mandated standards. Yeah, all right. So next slide. So the focus of this document, the document is to serve as a best practice for 911 call handling at PSAPs in the Commonwealth. It's an overview of 911 call taking with a focus on kind of the operational aspects of that process. And it's a recommended informational resource to be used in conjunction with national standards and other best practices that may be out there. So I think Steve mentioned this as this document was put together, we borrowed heavily from the existing NENA call-taking operational standard, and then this document adds some best practices for what should be done specifically here in the Commonwealth based on our system design, PSAP operational models, some current proven practices, and things like that. All right, next slide. Okay, so 911 call handling best practice topics. These are all the main topics that are contained in the document. There is, of course, more content in the document, but during this session, we're just going to dive a little bit into each one of these topics and then give some specific examples of best practices that go along with them. So these are all the topics that we're going to cover in the session and that are covered in the document. All right, next slide. All right, so first we have call delivery. So in Virginia, 911 calls are passed through the telephone company's selective routers and then are sent to the appropriate PSAP. So to ensure diversity and redundancy in the system, if a failure should occur, each PSAP should be served with a minimum of 2 wireline and 2 wireless 911 telephone trunks from 2 diverse selective routers. So beyond that, the number of trunks in the PSAP will be agency-specific. So we do recommend as a best practice that PSAPs perform an annual analysis of their call volumes. You might do that through your call accounting system, or you could do that by working with your LEC to perform a traffic study. So doing this will assure that you have the proper number of 911 trunks to handle the volume of calls that you receive. And then next. So we're also recommending that each PSAP in Virginia engage with your local exchange carrier, with your LEC, to develop and complete a disaster recovery plan, and that these plans get tested annually. So this will ensure that in the event of a failure or a disaster to the system or to the facility, all the roles and responsibilities and processes are clearly defined and documented and executable. So we've heard from some PSAPs that have undergone this process of creating the disaster recovery plan and testing it with their LEC, and they have found a lot of value in that. So we encourage as a best practice that all of our PSAPs in the Commonwealth go through this process. All right, next. So moving on to call distribution, which means how the calls are delivered to and answered by the call takers. There are essentially two ways that this can be handled. One is to use the first available call taker, and then the other is implementing automatic call distribution, which allows the system to equally distribute calls among the call takers based on their availability and their roles. So our recommendation and best practice is that PSAPs below a 30,000 annual call volume use the first available methodology, and that those above a 30,000 annual call volume use the automatic call distribution method. And I believe that that was also a recommendation in an APCO standard that we looked at, but it seems to be a pretty appropriate break point for this type of call distribution. Yep. And then moving on to call answering, the document acknowledges and encourages meeting the NENA standard of answering 90% of incoming 911 calls within the first 10 seconds. We also recommend establishing answering priorities, including a 911 to be answered first, followed by emergency 7 or 10-digit phone lines, then non-emergency lines, and then finally administrative and internal phone lines. The answering language or protocol for 911 lines should always include location by having the call taker ask, what is the address of your emergency, or where is the emergency? Very important to get that location information as soon as possible. And then, of course, it's also time to do address or location verification. If it's a wireline call, the alley should be verified with the caller. If it's a wireless call, the class of service should be checked, and a rebid of information should be done if it's presented as a wireless phase 1 call. So again, location information should be verified with the caller, and we recommend that PSAPs check on the ability of their call handling equipment to do automatic rebids, which can be set at certain time intervals. If that is something that is a capability of your call handling equipment and you find it to be feasible and appropriate, we do recommend that you establish the automatic rebid functionality. So with that, I'll take a little breath and see if anyone has any questions so far. All right, hearing none. All right, so communicating with the caller. The call taker should always begin by gathering that basic information, which includes the location, like we just talked about, the type of emergency, a callback number, and any potential hazards that may be on site. And then as this information is being gathered, dispatch can certainly be initiated. And as a best practice, each PSAP should have an established and detailed procedure for call processing based on the types of calls, and should make sure that they train on those processes consistently and often. So we're not using this document to actually set any internal procedures and policies, but we are stating that it's very important that you have those set up and that you do training on those. And the next, Steve. And then regarding emergency medical dispatch, we offer that due to the highly effective and life-saving success of EMD, each PSAP in Virginia should have an established EMD protocol in place and have all their call takers certified on this system. And if any of you don't yet have an EMD protocol in place, we do encourage you to reach out to the Office of Emergency Medical Services for some assistance in getting that set up. So we feel that EMD is very important and should be available from every PSAP in the Commonwealth. All right, next. Oh, you beat me. All right, so call transfers. So if the transfer of an emergency 911 call is necessary, it should be done as quickly as possible. Callers should not be given a number and told to make the call themselves. It's the best practice to have programmed into your console the direct emergency line of all the adjacent PSAPs and other agencies that you frequently transfer to. So this will allow for one-button transfers. As well, emergency numbers of the PSAPs that are farther away than adjacent to yours should be kept in a PSAP call list. So again, just being able to get in touch with not only your neighbors, but maybe even further away PSAPs, and having a process for doing that is very important. Another very important thing is that blind transfers of emergency calls, where the originating PSAP disconnects before establishing contact with the PSAP they are transferring to, that should never be done. You should not blind transfer any 911 calls. Stay on the line and relay the information, make sure the call makes it through. All right, so if a non-emergency call is received through a 911 trunk, for example, someone might call 911 to report some stolen property, the caller should be given a number to call back to. You should not transfer a non-emergency call received on a 911 trunk because we found that it can often hold that trunk in a busy status, not letting other emergency calls come through. So don't transfer non-emergency calls if they were received on a 911 trunk. And then I'll take another pause and see if anyone has any questions. Hopefully everyone's still awake.
Oh.
Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Of course.
All right, there we go. All right. Yep, next slide we've got. So the next topic is telematics and alarms. It is a best practice to have these calls presented on a dedicated 10-digit line so that your call takers know the nature of this call and that it should be treated like an emergency call. If it's coming into the PSAP on just a regular 10-digit line, then of course it can't be prioritized any higher than any other call. So a dedicated 10-digit line for telematics and alarms is a best practice. And next, Steve. And then for text to 911, we are following the Commonwealth's implementation guide as a best practice, and we want to make sure that folks pursue a web-based or a direct IP solution, that everyone has, if you're implementing text to 911, a proactive public education campaign. And then we also want to make sure we keep an eye to integrating statewide text to 911 with the deployment of next generation 911. All right, next. All right, so next, the document addresses the handling of non-standard calls. These are calls where the nature of the call cannot be easily determined, so you need some detailed procedures for handling these types of calls, and they should be established and used there in the PSAP. So some calls that fall under this category are abandoned calls or disconnects, silent calls, missed dials, unintentional calls, and prank calls. So the document goes on to talk a little bit about some best practices and how to handle those types of calls. So for an example, we offer that silent calls should always be responded to with a TTD or TTY, just to assure that the caller is or is not trying to communicate with 911 through a device for the hearing impaired. So again, we offer some suggestions on each one of these call types and how they should be handled. All right, next slide. And then the final topics covered are error reporting and correction and quality assurance programs. So there are, as we all know, many types of errors that can occur during the call handling process, things like alley failures, mapping failures, equipment problems, et cetera. So there should be established at each PSAP an error reporting and correction procedure. It should be put in place to handle each of the different possibilities. And there should be a process for after, if you've had an error, you feel you've corrected the error, you need to also have in place a process where you try to recreate that error to assure that there was a successful resolution. So those are some of the best practices that go along with error reporting and quality assurance programs. So next slide, Steve. So, in some conclusions that we've come up with regarding this best practices, that we know that 911 call handling is very complex and that it requires detailed procedures to assure that consistency and effective call taking. So these processes and procedures need to be part of a PSAP's thorough training program, and we hope that, as you read the document and as you feel appropriate, that the best practices addressed in this document can be incorporated into your local policies and procedures and training programs that you put together. So we want you to review this document in its draft form. Let us know if it covers the majority of the topics. Are there things that you feel are spot on? Are there things you feel that were left out that should be included? And we encourage you to get back with us and let us know your feedback so we can make this document as usable for you guys as possible. And again, that was certainly the short version of the information that's in the document. There's a lot more there to be looked at. So again, encouraging everyone to do that. So does anyone have any questions on that? On anything we covered? Don't be shy.
Stephanie, this is Steve, and let me just add one thing, or add just to be perfectly clear to everybody, is this is not a state mandate or anything that we're saying you need to do. So please do not take this document to your administration and say the state's requiring us to implement EMD. We absolutely do believe EMD is the best practice. APCO has said that. Nina has said that. I think most of you that have implemented would agree with that. And to the extent that telling your locality that it is a best practice within 911 helps you advance the deployment of EMD, great. Do it. But this isn't a requirement that you have to do these things. And you probably, as you look through the document, and probably as Stephanie talked, you were thinking to yourself, some of this is no-brainer stuff. Some of this is stuff we've been doing for 20, 30 years. Absolutely. That's what a lot of times best practices are. It's documenting what we do and what we do well, and you may already be doing it. We have had at times people talk about best practices, especially one like this, and say, but every 911 call is different. You really can't have a policy or a process or procedure on call handling because every call is different. You never know what to expect. While there is some truth to that, there are some core things like the making sure a silent call isn't a TDD or TTY, a hearing impaired caller, or calling back an abandoned call. That are best practices that you really do want to make sure occur every time. So that's what we're looking to capture. Not every possible thing that could possibly maybe happen, or I remember one time when this happened or whatever. That's not a best practice. It's really intended to be, generally speaking, across the board, these are the things that we want to do. How we answer the phone, how we transfer calls, how we resolve silent calls or abandoned calls or misrouted calls or prank calls and those types of things. There are better ways of dealing with that or a best way of dealing with that, and that's what this is intended to capture. So you may want to pick and choose things from this. It is on our website as a PDF. We're more than happy to share it as a doc file, a Word document, in which you can cut and paste from it into your own SOPs if you have them, or create your own SOPs from them. You don't have to take it all. You don't have to adopt the VITA document. Create your own local and then adopt that as policy, or incorporate something you already have. That's the intention behind it. And again, a lot of it's stuff you're probably already doing, but you may not have documented somewhere. Any questions? Or I think we're at the point of the audience participation. We intended this to be relatively short instead of filling the entire hour. We definitely don't need to talk about it for the next half hour. Unless you want to, we'll talk about it as long as you want to. But are there any questions, or is there any feedback on it? And again, this is a starting point. We can definitely look at how do we. We intend that this will be built on through time as we move forward, especially as we move into next gen. We're quite confident that there'll be best practices from that will be incorporated into this because of different ways that we're handling calls in the future and transferring data or things like that.
Hello?
We're here. So any questions, comments, concerns?
Regarding 10.3 misdials, it seems like it's a little incomplete compared to 10.4 unintentional calls, which addresses non-suspicious background noise, whereas the misdial section does not. Have you all looked at possibly revising that?
We can.
Fantastic.
And who was that, so that we can get back to
you? I'm sorry, it's Roanoke County.
It's Mary Martinez with Roanoke County.
Okay. Thank you for the comment. Yeah, we definitely can. That's the type of feedback we need, because for a misdial, somebody stays on the line and talks to us is sometimes, I guess, we viewed it as a little bit easier to resolve, and that's why it was a little bit less there. But we definitely want to make sure we cover all our bases on it.
Yeah, and this is Stephanie. If we have people on the call or who have heard about this best practices who are training coordinators at PSAPs, I'd really like for you guys too as well to have a look at the document. Any of the managers, if you have a training coordinator, send the document to them. I think those folks certainly would have a lot of good feedback to making sure it's as comprehensive but not overwhelming as we can make it. So I would offer that to folks. And also, as I've kind of gone back through the document again and getting ready for this webinar and then sitting here talking about it with you guys today, some of the things I was reading, I was thinking, it'd be good if we had examples of how to do that. For example, we tell you to make sure you establish certain policies and procedures, or with the corrective plans and things like error correction and things like that. It would probably be beneficial to you if we were able to have some examples of what those programs should look like, or what all should be included in those types of programs, and maybe have some appendices to this document that includes that information. I think I just made a little extra work for myself, but that's okay.
Yeah, and if you have something that you do a little different, I mean, I know PSAPs all talk, and you may know that you handle misdials or prank callers or something with a unique twist. Please offer that. Sometimes a best practice, we find best practices that way, where somebody goes, hey, well, we kind of do it this way, and everybody looks and goes, wow, why didn't we think of that? The old story I always like to tell, and the technology is a little dated because I'm old, but I was once visited the Murrells Inlet, South Carolina dispatch center, which was in the watch office of the firehouse, and this was back in the late 80s, and they had a fax machine, and at the time, fax machines were rare, and I couldn't understand how that little small communication center had a fax machine, and their answer was, well, we use it to fax power line listings down, power outages and power lines down to the power companies, so we don't have to sit there on the phone and dictate it to them over the phone. And it was like, wow, that's brilliant. I mean, yeah, we're each writing down a list and we're calling the other and we're reading the list to each other. Why not just drop it in the fax and fax it to each other? And it was so simple. It was brilliant. But, we hadn't thought about it. And I'd never heard anybody before or since doing it. But, somehow Little Merle's Inlet, South Carolina came up with that idea and it became pretty widely done in the 80s and 90s after that because it saved an incredible amount of time of the telecommunicators not having to sit there and read lists to people. You could just drop it in the fax. And I know it justified the fax machine in our PSAP that we couldn't justify before. And again, the technology is kind of dated. We'll probably use email for that now, or other ways. But probably there's an app for that on your smartphone. But those are the types of things. If you found ways to do things that maybe are unique or inventive or innovative, those are the types of things we can put in this best practice document and share with your compatriots around the Commonwealth. So please don't be afraid to share something that you do that's kind of unique. Take credit for it and let us know. Are there any other comments, questions?
The kid was probably not born in 20 years.
Well, please download the document if you haven't. Review it. You all should know how to get a hold of me. I put out the email or Stephanie or any of your regional coordinators. Tim, Amy, Brian, Sam, or Lyle, and go ahead and give us whatever feedback you have to make the document better or to make it to expand it. And we'll be doing the next webinar Wednesday will be in 2 weeks for the grant guideline changes. We're making significant changes this year again. Trying to refine the grant guidelines, and we want to make sure that before it goes to the PSAP Grant Committee for final recommendation to the board, that we give an opportunity to the locality community, GIS and PSAP, to give us feedback. The most significant changes this time are probably in the GIS area. We want to make sure everybody's aware of what the changes are before they become the law of the land, as it were, so you have an opportunity to provide feedback. So that'll be March 30th. Same conference bridge, different WebEx link, but it's on our website. And then we'll be doing one after that for the data analytics, and we'll be doing one for the Regional Advisory Council on we'll be doing Rapid SOS, which is an application that allows you to, that a person can download from the App Store and actually place a 911 call through the app that provides a better, more accurate location according to the solution provider to the PSAP. And they do have some other capabilities that are unique to their app that you may want to learn about as well. And then we'll be doing one about the Regional Advisory Council in early May. And somewhere in there we'll also be doing one on the data analytics project that the board just approved as well. So, we know we have a bunch of them coming up over the next few weeks, but there's a lot going on right now, and we want to make sure everybody stays informed. So if there's nothing else for the good of the order, thank you all for being on the call today and participating. The recording of it will be placed on our website in a few days, and the presentation and the document are there as well. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.